Today I'm going to dissect and analyze invented historical conversations in the novel Lady of the Rivers by Philippa Gregory. Philippa Gregory is a historical fiction writer who gives a voice to her characters otherwise silenced in history, like Jaquetta, the protagonist in Lady of the Rivers. Gregory fills out the story with invented conversations to connect the tip of the iceberg, well-known history, with the mess of the story in which history is found. Gregory introduces a relationship to develop a situation in which she places people and events written out of history. In The Lady of the Rivers, Joan of Arc introduces the novel's setting in a conversation with 14-year-old Jaquetta and her great-aunt. In example 1, Gregory invents the conversation that might have happened. It establishes Jaquetta's ability to learn, recognize, and manage the rules of power. Great-aunt talking to Joan. I will tell them to take the chains off you and guard you so that you do not escape, and then you can come and sit with us in my rooms. I think what you have done for your country and for your prince has been very great, Joan, though mistaken, and I will not see you here, under my roof, a captive in chains. Joan, will you tell your nephews to set me free? My great-aunt hesitates. I cannot order him, but I will do everything I can to send you back to your home. At any event, I won't let him release you to the English. At the very word, the girl shudders. Jaquetta. There are only mortal men, I explain to her. The English have no powers beyond that of mortal men. You need not fear them so. You need not cross yourself at their name. Joan. I do not fear them. I am no such fool as to fear that they have powers. It's not that. It's that they know that I have powers. That's what makes them such a danger. They are mad at me with fear of me. While I live, they won't have you, my great-aunt assures her, and at once, unmistakably, Joan looks straight at me, a hard, dark gaze as if to see that I have heard. In this sincere assertion, the ring of an utterly empty promise. In this example, dialogue is the obvious technique used here. However, Gregory has imagined what she assumes must have been or could have been a conversation between these three women and what they would have been like. Gregory is able to fill in the gap history so successfully neglected. When Jaquetta's great-aunt says, while I live, they won't have you, it allows a vulnerable Joan of Arc to feel supported by these women momentarily. We all know the fate of Joan of Arc. However, Gregory gives faith to the reader by making them believe Joan could be pardoned, that the great-aunt could have held some power over the situation, and that there might have been attempts to stop her trial and death sentence. It was not a foregone conclusion, as history has generally dictated. All three speakers have the background information on Joan's fate, yet she is led to believe she has a chance to be free. This creates friction in the conversation, which causes drama. It puts us in the picture with the characters speaking, not only by what they are saying, but how they say it. The personal setting and relationship between the speakers and the reader allow the story to advance. There is even the possibility of collusion between the characters and a modern-day reader. For example, Joan quickly becomes friends with Jaquetta, and Jaquetta's great-aunts puts assurance into Joan, creating a mentor of sorts. Alchemist to Jaquetta. Sometimes visions come darkly. When a man wants a mystery, it is generally better to leave him mystified. Nobody loves a clever woman. Will you come here and pour this liquid into a mold? Some processes call for a woman's touch. Jaquetta. I have no skills, denying her own abilities, and when I have visions, they are sent by God and are unclear to me. Example 2 shows the inequality women suffered and still struggle with to this day. Gregory doesn't have to use her imagination here to create this conversation. She captures this simple exchange of Jaquetta and the king's alchemist telling her exactly how it is. Even though this particular man doesn't know that Jaquetta has the foreseeing sight, he treats her visions as not something to ignore. It is clear Jaquetta feels anxious in this conversation because she is relying on insecure statements to hide her ability and cleverness. The conversation exposes the society's norms of the time, namely that certainty held by men no more than women, and also that men, and only men, are able to assign capabilities and abilities to women. In other words, Jaquetta cannot claim her own abilities. If she doesn't agree with the man, the only alternative is to protect herself and to defer to God. This technique is important for Gregory's stories so that she can immerse the reader in the context of the history. Although history rarely records conversation, Gregory pulls this knowledge from her immense research and achieved suitable and assuredly accurate exchanges between characters that seem legitimate. Gregory successfully engages with her imagination to produce a fully rounded picture of the entire story about Jacquetta and Richard Rivers. Gregory's stories are successful because of her detailed character development of what history would only have known as Jacquetta of Luxembourg. Jacquetta is an important character because of her foreseeing ability called the sight, which in general is recorded as a belief system of the time. The character development allows the reader to understand Jacquetta of Luxembourg as a powerful woman who was fortunate to have more control over her life than women generally from that era. Princess Margaret of Anjou to Jacquetta. My mother says you have the gift of foresight. I want you to draw cards for me. Jacquetta. I cannot. The court of England does not like prophesying or casting horoscopes. I dare not. Princess Margaret of Anjou. The court of England will never know. If I command it, you will have to. You are my lady in waiting. You have to do what I say. The third and final example proves that this initial exchange was part of the building blocks at the beginning of a strong friendship between the future queen and Jacquetta. A private conversation like this would rarely, if ever, be recorded for posterity. It is a creative exercise of the author's imagination. Not only is this topic of foresight and prophecies the work of witches, it is illegal in the English court and could produce a death sentence for a woman. Again, it is well documented that witches were too often punished with death. Gregory's invention of this conversation provides a challenge to Jacquetta's character. This young princess commanding her to tell her future, while Jacquetta is in a vulnerable position being a young widow and therefore might not be able to stay at court without a husband. The tension arises when Jacquetta says, I dare not. The future queen uses her power to force Jacquetta even though she's threatening her life if she proceeds. Awkwardness also follows this tension as these two women gamble with life in privacy. History would never acknowledge such a conversation or even the women's friendship. The generally accepted history records only that the King of England, Henry VI, married a princess of France to secure France as an ally in the 15th century to prevent war. Gregory's successful strategies by developing these invented conversations in history delivers plausible friendships and situations that women would have dealt with in this time. Moreover, objectively they make more sense of history. All of this makes for a compelling read. Looking at my short story hymn in comparison to Gregory's style and technique is interesting because of my use of an invented conversation in a contemporary context. I created a typical situation where the character, Ava, is at a New Year's Eve party and meets a guy. I scripted the conversation to be customary to the event and current time. Ava is familiar with her surroundings as she knows several friends at the party, but is happily distracted by this guy and immediately starts talking to him. The conversation begins with small talk but quickly progresses to a deeper and meaningful subject of beliefs. In this example, I created a conversation that is a common report among my friends and myself. Ava to Kieran. I don't think I necessarily believe in anything particular. I would even call myself an atheist, but I believe in karma and fiddle with some superstitions. Kieran. Yeah, I think I'm the same, but I believe there is something up there, but not a man who says he's God. What about spirits or ghosts? Do you believe in them? Ava. I'm not sure about ghosts, but I believe there are definitely spirits. I believe there are some paranormal sightings that are real. This conversation, although invented, seems like a regular conversation that two strangers could share. Comparing my piece of writing, written in a modern setting, to Gregory's historical fiction leaves a grey area where imagination wasn't needed as much for my piece. It was drawn from my own inner monologue. Creating a modern conversation is less stressful because the accuracy of the information needed is open to sudden changes. To change a trajectory of a historical conversation could complicate the character's intentions in any piece of dialogue. Ava and Kieran discuss a topic that would be considered illegal in the 15th century and in Lady of the Rivers. To speak freely of your spiritual opinions were not allowed in the court of England. The reader is constantly reminded through the novel why Jacquetta must act accordingly. Gregory's invented conversations puts a deeper understanding into what women were actually thinking and doing while away from the public eye and their husbands. In order to successfully invent a conversation in a historical piece, you must know the history you're researching in every detail to portray an accurate conversation. To include invented conversations, the characters must follow the rules of their society or period, while also experiencing obstacles in their life for the story to be compelling. For example, Gregory chooses to focus on women because their stories are the most untold. Therefore, she was able to invent more conversations and events among her female characters because history has never accurately portrayed them. In summary, the backstory of how an important event in history was enabled and supported is often untold, but can be elicited or discovered by looking at the surrounding information and giving it a voice. Gregory gave this voice to Jacquetta of Luxembourg, who forged her own path in history quite subtly, as she eventually became Jacquetta Rivers and best friend to the Queen of England. Gregory's use of invented conversations gives the history a captivating plot and an accurate timeline for its era. This technique helps the reader understand the women ignored in history through their voice and character development. A conversation between characters is a key feature to any relationship in a novel. Dialogue that has been invented in a historical context has to cohesively follow the script of the specific period of time and events. Thus, inventing a historical conversation, you have to explain the character's position in the story, as it relies on efficient research and complex detail.